Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for that clarification. All right. Now, when people say Africans have no history, like you just pointed out in your explanation, what comes to your mind in as a reaction to a statement like that? Because this is not something that was said in some random places. This
Mm,
was said by some of the biggest European scholars at the time, and it was widely heard as a view. So, as a historian, an African historian who was looking at history from a different perspective than the European, what is your reaction?
I suppose the first reaction is what kind of ego does Europe have to suggest that a people who has been around for thousands of years, even when the anthropologists began to do their work in Europe and began to understand just how long, even by let's just say the 1960s or 70s, when they began to understand just how long people have been on Earth and just how long people have lived in various geographical locales, and to still suggest or to still uh, allow the suggestion that people can live in various areas for thousands of years and not have formed their own processes of culture and history and what it means to them to be a modern people from their own perspective. People think of modern things or modernism by technology, uh, but that's how the Western world has allowed us to perceive things that are modern. Modern can really just be in the line of ideas or just culture or how people in contemporary society view their contemporary society. But regardless of that, what I think of is that the second thing is that we have a lot of work to do in order to upend these ridiculous notions, to upend colonial ideas, and to restore and recenter African people.
Okay. Now, by history itself, of course, I do not subscribe to the fact that we need to expect the European to tell the African story. I've said it a number of times. I've interviewed some professors here, even European professors, and I've told them that is not your job. The job is for other people. That is the African people. Because,
Mm-hmm.
like Dr. Ben was saying, there is too much involved in the telling of a story that European just cannot tell the African story. Point,
Absolutely.
full stop. All right. Now, when we talk of history, let's try to even romanticize the story that Africa have no story. Okay, fine, we got it. What do they really mean by story? What do you need to demonstrate that there is a story?
So in the field of history, now there's quite a few now who try to break out of this paradigm, right? But in the Eurocentric field of history in their discipline, um, which I began in my bachelor's degree, so I know a little bit about, uh, there was this bifurcation of time known as prehistory and history, right? And prehistory was largely dependent upon the notion that people had not began writing, right? So if there's no writing to be spoken of, then or to be that has been discovered, then that's prehistoric. And in the moment that people began writing and documenting history, supposedly, is history. It's going towards the more modern era of the time spectrum, right? Which to me has always been a ridiculous notion. Uh, what societies would always need, or what would be the need for every society on Earth to develop a writing system? Particularly, what would be the need of smaller societies, smaller groups who do very well communicating among themselves, or even small groups within larger clans or whatever have you, who do very well communicating within themselves orally, need to absolutely need to write, that have, or groups that have traditions oral traditions, right, of passing down history would not necessarily need writing. That doesn't mean that various groups did not create writing, right? But and didn't have it alongside, or their oral traditions and things of that nature. But to suggest that writing is the end all be all of civilization is kind of a ridiculous notion. And so because Europeans were going to the African continent and not discovering, papyrus in West Africa, so which, by the way, you have to consider that the climate of various parts of West Africa going down towards the south might not always allow for various things to be preserved. So there could have been writing there from centuries ago, that just was not preserved well or haven't been preserved at all, and people haven't discovered because the climate doesn't really allow for it. When you go to Egypt, it's a very arid climate. You can find many things because it's capable of preserving various material culture like that. So there's that thing. But regardless of that, to suggest that writing is the end all be all of civilization and where history begins, as I stated before, it's just ridiculous. But that is where that assertion comes from, and that is what's been perpetuated throughout the world.
Thank you for that. All right, now the assertion actually have different dimensions that need explanation sometime. Okay, now let's even give it to the European that Egypt is not Africa. I get it. This is another way of saying Italy is not a European country because it's a Mediterranean country, okay? But even though that is actually contradictory because there is nothing in the Mediterranean that say that because you are on this side of the ocean, you are no longer part of that land.
Right.
Anyway, to a European, you will see that you don't make any sense saying that Italy is not a European country. But for them, it makes sense perfectly to say, well, Egypt is not an Africa, even though it's actually Africa in every sense of it. Okay, now let's give it to them. Fine. Europe, you are Africans. The Israelites built the pyramid. They first of all were not in existence. They built the pyramid, then they disappeared from existence. Then they came out in existence after I don't know how they managed to convince the people. Is it because people were just too ignorant in the world that people didn't ask questions? I don't even understand it. Let's even give it to them that Egypt is not even in Africa because we are looking at writing now. Now, let's look at Sudan, Nubia, which is just a neighbor because, okay, in Nubia, the pyramid there, in the text, in the shrine, in the places of worship, there are texts. Is it not true? Those things have been there for, those one doesn't represent text or those people, the first European who were recording the word, they didn't discover that there were things there. So I'm trying to understand how they managed to convince that in Africa there was no writing, therefore there is no history. They didn't see it. They were not able to see it, or they just ignore it. Nobody talked of ancient Zimbabwe. Because that is made of paper. Help me.
Zimbabwe, huge stone palaces and things of that nature, which interestingly, when you talk of Zimbabwe, there was someone by the name of, I don't recall if I got it out of Saul DeBoe's book or from Basil Davison, but at one time, there was some suggestion that writing was discovered in Zimbabwe, and maybe it's sitting in whatever they found, some kind of slate, maybe it's sitting in someone's closet right now because during the colonial era, they just took a lot of things out of there. Right. But, what is it that we consider writing? I would challenge people to break out of their own paradigms of what writing is. Is not art a form of communication, or what we consider just art itself? And you find art all over the African continent, right? And it means different things to different people. It means a particular thing to the people who created the art in the first place, and to the culture that they come from and the society that they lived in, that communicates something, that means something. And so, that in itself is a form of writing. That's a form of that's civilization, that's, you know, high culture. But we're often left with this notion that, you know, whatever Europe says is a certain thing, that's what it is. And so if it doesn't meet European standard, then, you know, that's where we are.